Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 679, and today is September 30th, 2024. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. It was a huge weekend. We have a ton of news to talk about, a lot of really important stuff to get through. But first, need to mention the sponsor of the show, and that is, of course, the Expat Money Summit 2024 coming up here in just about a week. It kicks off on October 7th, and it's going to run through October 11th. It's put on by our friend and the host of the Expat Money Show, Mikhail Thorup, and he is a highly sought after expat consultant, and so he's put together a great lineup of speakers for this event, including Scott Horton, Tom Woods, and Ron Paul. You could get a complimentary ticket to the event just by going to expatmoneysummit.com. Again, that's expatmoneysummit.com, or be even better if you click through from the link in the show notes page. Want to do that soon because this event is going to kick off here in just about a week. It is an online event, so anybody could attend no matter where you're living in the world. Again, just go on over to expatmoneysummit.com to get your ticket. If you want a VIP ticket to the event, and I will be speaking on one of the VIP panels, I know they are a little pricey, but you can save $100 when you use the promo code Kyle, Kyle, at checkout. I know some of you have already gotten your complimentary tickets through to the event through my link, and I really appreciate y'all doing that. The more we are able to interact and patronize the sponsor of the show, it's going to help the show attract new sponsors in the future. So we are really happy to have the Expat Money Summit here on board. I very much like Mikhail Thorup, and I'm sure his event is going to be fantastic. And again, get your complimentary ticket. Also, just going to mention that the show is hosted at the libertarianinstitute.org, on the blog at antiwar.com, YouTube, Rumble, Odysee for the video version of the show. It's up anywhere you can listen to audio podcasts. And of course, the best place to follow me is on Twitter at @KyleAnzalone_. All right, we're starting off today with my Libertarian Institute debrief from last night. That's September 29th, 2024. It's titled, Democrats Hate the First Amendment. So John Kerry is the latest leader of the Democratic Party to publicly state his opposition to free speech and the First Amendment. And so these are remarks he made at a World Economic Forum event. Our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just hammer out disinformation out of existence. So what we need is to win the ground to govern by hopefully winning enough votes that we're free to be able to implement change. Now, obviously, there's some people in our country who are prepared to implement change in other ways, and that's what we're aiming for, democracy, so democracy can survive. Can we break the fever in the United States? Kerry is not alone in his stance. Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris, and Tim Walz have all suggested that free speech is an obstacle to combating disinformation. Donald Trump additionally has pledged to wield federal government power to crush anti-war and pro-Palestinian protesters on American university campuses. He has deemed the anti-genocide demonstrators as anti-Semitic propaganda. However, Kerry reveals the true reason why the Democratic Party leadership has turned on free speech. The First Amendment protects Americans' ability to gather information that isn't issued from the Ministry of Truth in Washington, D.C. And when people have access to independent information, they form independent thoughts. This is a problem for a party that wants to rule via majority rule or democracy, especially if the American people, by and large, have no trust in their rulers, corporate news, or their narratives. And so in his little talk here, he continues to say, and I think the dislike and anguish over social media is growing and growing and growing, and it's part of our problem, particularly in democracies, in terms of building consensus around any issue. It's really hard to govern today. You can't, the reference we use, we have to determine what's a fact and what isn't a fact. That's kind of eviscerated to a certain degree. And now people self-select where they go for their news or for their information. And you just get into a vicious cycle. So it's really, really hard, much harder to build consensus today than it was any time in the past 45, 50 years I've been involved in this. I think democracies are very challenged right now and have not proven they are fast enough or big enough to deal with the challenges that we are facing. And so I think, this is just a really blatant truth. Now, he kind of says it in the typical politician way, where it's a little bit convoluted here. But what he's saying is that because you could go and get your news from Facebook or Twitter and just anybody who's posting on there. And so it may be independent media, it may be foreign media, it may be, US government state media, another government state media. And then on top of that, people are going to be able to give their own interpretation of the facts that they saw. People are able to post raw content, just videos, images. This is what actually happened. We know because here's a video of it. Here's all the different testimony. I mean, the amount of information that people could get their hands on today is just absolutely massive. What would have been libraries that would have been larger than most people's homes, they could have never had the information that you have at your fingertips at all times. And so he's saying that this is a real problem for democracies because they rule via majority rule. And so for the Democrats to get their policies implemented in the United States, they need to get the majority of the population on board, or this is kind of how he views the problem. Generally speaking, I think it's more about getting the people elected than actually getting them to buy into a certain policy. But this is the way he's spinning it and he's talking about. But he's saying that, because everybody's able to get their information in different sources, it's really hard to rule via majority rule. And this is presenting a problem for us. And so I guess, this is the optimism of the internet, right? Like the downside is surveillance, and that essentially, in my case, I'm in front of a microphone a lot, but even all of you listening to this show are probably in front of a microphone as you're listening to this show. And who knows how much information the government has collected and has stored on all of us over our lifetimes. And so, there is a downside in the surveillance aspect of it, in that there may not really be any privacy anywhere in America anymore. However, at the same time, they can't control what you think because they can't control everything you know. And so that is really important. Now, he is saying this is a problem and we're going to try to, gut this problem and take care of it, which is part of the reason why we need to continue to fight to make sure that they don't do this. But I do think this is probably the biggest threat of Kamala Harris getting reelected, is we could really see a lot more encroachments on the freedom of speech. So back to my newsletter here. So you see, everyone needs to agree that the right people to rule and our policies are the correct ones. And you know that because we told you. Of course, Kerry tries the typical Democratic spin. This is really all to protect you, he says. And there's a lot of discussion now about how to curb those entities in order to guarantee that you're going to have, some accountability on facts, etc. But look, if people go only to one source and the source they go to is sick and has an agenda and they're putting out disinformation. And he's saying, this is a real problem and we need to address this and there needs to be accountability for this. But this doesn't make any sense, because does the same standard apply to the mainstream outlets and journalists that lied about Iraqi weapons of mass destruction, Gaddafi's mass rape, or Russiagate? I mean, the mainstream media, their lies after 9/11 made the American people hate the people of the Middle East, or generally speaking, maybe Muslims or Arabs more broadly. It's kind of hard to quantify because really tally up, of course, because a lot of the hatred was directed at Afghans who aren't really Arabs, but they're Muslims and they're on the opposite side of Iran. And then, the main focus was on the Iraqis, which of course are, Arab Muslims, and Saddam Hussein, and trying to link him to Osama bin Laden, and all of this created just so much hate in the American populace. And yet John Kerry doesn't want any of these people thrown in jail. He doesn't want accountability for any of them. He doesn't want their content taken down. He's not talking about having the American government have some kind of fact check thing for Reuters or the Washington Post or New York Times. No, it's just for the independent media, because even though there's a lot that independent media gets wrong. Look, over the weekend, we'll talk about what happened in Lebanon, but there were a lot of people saying that Israel had dropped a 5,000-pound bomb on Lebanon, like had dropped hundreds or dozens of 5,000-pound bombs on Lebanon. That didn't make much sense. It looked like 2,000 or, large explosions, certainly from bombs. I'm not a weapons expert, but I have seen lots of 2,000-pound bomb explosions now, particularly from the Gaza war. It looked a lot like that, and that's what it turned out to be. So the independent media does get things wrong. However, there is a lot more accountability in the independent media because people stop following you when you get things wrong, especially if you don't correct yourself and as soon as you know the truth. So sure, there are some right-winger posting an unvetted video purporting to show a person from a minority group assaulting a white person, and that could generate some additional racial hatred in the US, but the lives from you and your friends, John Kerry, have killed millions. So where's the accountability for that? All right, everybody, again, you sign up for my newsletter at the Libertarian Institute. Next up, moving to an article I wrote for the Institute yesterday on September 29th. Zelensky, Trump assured me he would support Ukraine. So Ukrainian President Zelensky told Fox News that former President Donald Trump reassured him that Washington will maintain its support for Kiev should he return to the White House. The Ukrainian leader said Trump made the remarks when the two met last week. He said, "I don't know what will be after the elections and who will be the president, but I've got from Donald Trump very direct information that he will be on our side, that he will support Ukraine." Last week, Zelensky traveled to the U.S. and met with Trump, Vice President Kamala Harris, and President Joe Biden to present Ukraine's victory plan. The Wall Street Journal reports that senior U.S. and European officials say the proposal contains no clear path to victory for Ukraine. The plan was described as offering nothing new and repackaged several old requests for more weapons and permissions to use them in Russia. One official told the Wall Street Journal, "I'm unimpressed. There's not much new there." While Democrats have targeted Trump as an apologist for Russian President Vladimir Putin and not supportive enough of Ukraine, the former president has supported sending arms to Ukraine. During his time in the Oval Office, Trump authorized arms transfers to Kiev, something his predecessor, Barack Obama, refused to do out of fear of crossing Moscow's red lines. Earlier this year, a massive $60 billion aid package for Ukraine was stalled in Congress. Several key figures in the debate report that Trump broke the deadlock when he threw his support behind the aid. Although Trump has claimed he would end the war if re-elected in November, he has not outlined a plan for accomplishing that. Instead, he has repeatedly stated the 2022 invasion would not have occurred if he had been president, and a lot of this isn't really sensical. He says, the Afghan withdrawal made it so Putin knew that the U.S. was weak. I would guess that Putin had other ways of sizing up Joe Biden, and obviously I don't think this war has gone the way that Putin thought it would. I think he thought he would be able to easily pressure Kiev into accepting a neutrality agreement, and this thing would have been over by March or April of 2022. Instead, straight out for 2.5 years now. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Russians are dead and injured. His country has lost, I'm sure, billions of dollars in military equipment. It's spent tens of billions of dollars in different kinds of missiles and drones targeting Ukraine. While there have probably been some positive economic impacts for Russia, as this war has kind of, I think, broken a little bit of a dam in the US-centric economic world order. This is really Washington just shooting them in the themselves with the foot with sanctions and threats of secondary sanctions against Russia, but it has shifted, I think, and created more of a space for Brits to be able to trade with each other, and this has been more prosperous for the BRICS nations, which include the Russia. And so this hasn't been like a massive internal economic slam for Russia, although I'm sure in the long term, Russia is going to pay the consequences of having hundreds of thousands of their young men sent off to war for the most productive years of their lives, coming back with permanent physical and mental injuries. We have learned our lesson from the Iraq War that it does not make you more prosperous to go to war. So Trump also insisted on Wednesday that Zelensky should have made a peace deal with Russia shortly after the war began. That would have, preserved Ukrainian territory. So it was an interesting statement from Trump. But overall, I think the problem remains with Trump that he doesn't really seem to have a plan for how to get this done. And if he listens to the people around him, then it's absolutely not going to get done because they're I'm sure he's going to surround himself with Republican hard caught at least, if not neocons. All right. Next story up here. This one I wrote for antiwar.com on September 27th. Israel will continue to increase assault on Lebanon. And so this was before the major strikes on Lebanon. So the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant explained on Friday morning that Tel Aviv is planning to ramp up its military operations in Lebanon. The remarks followed Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejecting a U.S. and French proposal for a ceasefire to halt the fighting on Israel's northern border. So while visiting northern Israel, Gallant said, "We've been hitting Hezbollah very hard over the year and especially in recent weeks. We will continue increasing this effort. We intend to bring about security to the communities in the north and return those who left to their homes safely." Israel's bombardment of southern and eastern Lebanon continued on Friday. On Monday, Tel Aviv launched one of the largest military assaults of the 21st century on Lebanon, killing over 500 people in a single day. The strikes have continued over the past week, with the death toll now surpassing 700. Again, that's as of Friday morning. That death toll has at least doubled as of when we are recording this show. So Gallant did not explain how Israel may increase its attacks on Lebanon. On Wednesday, the chief of the IDF said, "We're preparing for a ground invasion." He explained, "We do not stop. We continue to attack and continue to strike everywhere. The goal is very clear: to return the displaced residents of the north safely. To do this, we are preparing the ground maneuver," he told his soldiers. So Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is showing he is unwilling to de-escalate in Lebanon. On Thursday, the U.S. and France proposed a 21-day ceasefire deal on Israel's northern border. Netanyahu's office released a statement quickly rejecting the offer. It said, "The report about a ceasefire is incorrect. This is an American-French proposal that the Prime Minister has not even responded to. The report about the purported directive to ease up on the fighting in the north is the opposite of the truth. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has directed the IDF to continue fighting with full force, according to the plan that was presented to him. The fighting in Gaza will also continue until all objectives of the war have been achieved." Now, I think this is really important because a week ago, so before the fighting in Lebanon ramped up with the massive Israeli strikes a week ago today, that was Monday the 23rd, Axios reported that Tel Aviv had received support for its plan to ramp up attacks in Lebanon by claiming it was a policy of de-escalation through escalation. However, Netanyahu now appears unwilling to de-escalate. And so I think that's really important context for everything that's happening here. So if the plan was escalate to de-escalate, then after Israel's massive barrage and taking out a lot of Hezbollah targets through the week last week, then you would assume when the US and France come in and propose the ceasefire deal, then Israel should take that deal because that's the escalation and now we're de-escalating, which is what Washington wants, right? Kamala Harris would prefer that the war is as done as it can be before election day and as soon as possible, right? Like this not being an issue on voters' minds would be a positive for her. And so if it's out of the news cycle for 5 weeks before it happens, that sounds like good news for Kamala Harris. So this is certainly what the White House wanted, but Israel has done the exact opposite. So I think next we should go here. Biden-Harris released statements strongly backing Israel's killing of Nasrallah. So this is kind of a recap of what happened in Israel over the weekend. So on Saturday, both President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris released statements strongly backing the Israeli assassination of Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah, which was carried out by Israel using U.S. provided 2,000-pound bombs. President Biden said in a statement that Nasrallah's death was a measure of justice for his many victims, including thousands of American, Israelis, and Lebanese civilians. The president said the U.S. fully supports Israel's right to defend itself against Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and any other Iranian-supported terrorist group. Biden said he ordered Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin to send additional military assets to the region. Quote, I directed my Secretary of Defense to further enhance the defense posture of the U.S. military forces in the Middle East region to deter aggression and reduce the risk of a broader regional war. And so in this, there's a really good example of the propaganda and the kind of analysis and truth that somebody like John Kerry would like to suppress. And because, the mainstream media is just going to report that, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis are all terrorist groups. And this is going to present them in the minds of the American people as jihadists equivalent to Osama bin Laden. But this really isn't, the goals of these groups. In fact, Hezbollah and the Houthis in particular govern large swaths of the countries that they are in. I mean, the Houthis are the governing body of Yemen. I think about 80% of the Yemeni people live in the Houthi-controlled territory of the country. So while the Saudi bad side and their Al-Qaeda proxies maybe control a little bit more of the population of Yemen, I mean, the Houthis really are the government there. And again, Hezbollah in Lebanon has a lot of control over that government, a lot of governing powers, although I know that the government of Lebanon is quite dysfunctional due to its very kind of split up and chopped up amongst the different ethnic groups, and that causes some problems. And Hamas, again, isn't really an international terrorist organization. I mean, certainly Hamas in the past has engaged in terrorist attacks, and the attack on October 7th did kill civilians, and members of Hamas are certainly responsible for actually murdering Israeli civilians. Now, they killed military personnel on that day, and the Israeli military killed Israeli civilians as well, but some members of Hamas did break into Israel and just open fire on civilians. And so that is an attack, but that isn't the same thing as what I think Americans think about. Again, when you say that these are terrorist groups, you're thinking about international jihadist terrorism, that's a threat to America, and that really isn't what these three groups are about. Now, it's not impossible that some Osama bin Laden-like figure is going to use the slaughter of these Muslims in Yemen, in Palestine, in Lebanon, to try to radicalize and band together some other lunatics to carry out attacks in the United States of America. I think that's a real threat. I think that's something that we should be worried about in our support for Israel. But to say that this would be the goal of Hezbollah, Hamas, or the Houthis really isn't correct in understanding who these different groups are. So Biden claims that he seeks de-escalation in the region, but his administration has continued to provide military aid and other types of support for Israel since it began the dramatic escalation in Lebanon. Harris, the 2024 Democrat presidential nominee, released a similar statement saying that Hezbollah's victims have a measure of justice. The vice president says she is unwavering commitment to the security of Israel, adding, I will always support Israel's right to defend itself against Iran and Iran-backed terrorist groups such as Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis. Harris claimed that the administration was working for a diplomatic solution, but a day before Nasrallah was killed, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu rejected a U.S.-backed ceasefire proposal, and Israel says it secured $8.7 billion in new military aid from the U.S. An Israeli official told ABC News that Israel decided to kill Nasrallah because he wouldn't separate the situation at the Israel-Lebanon border from Gaza. Hezbollah has been clear that it would stop its attacks on northern Israel if there was a ceasefire in Gaza. The Israeli airstrike that killed Nasrallah leveled multiple residential buildings in Beirut. The attack also killed Abbas Nifl Forashan, a senior commander from the Iran Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps, and Tehran is vowing his death will not go unanswered, although Tehran also vowed that they would carry out a retaliation against Israel for the killing of Ismail Haniyeh, a the political chief of Hamas while he was attending a political ceremony in Iran, in Tehran. So that was the reason why Iran was going to respond to that, and they have not yet. So there could be major escalations coming between the war in Israel and Lebanon, especially because Israel has continued to pound Lebanon since my understanding is about 750 people were killed in the bombing that also killed Nasrallah. So that would bring the total up to about 1,500 at this point. But so far, it's exactly unclear as to how many people have been killed in all of this. And so it looks like further escalations are coming. Israel amasses troops, tanks on Lebanon border as heavy airstrikes continue. So Dave DeCamp writes here, Israel has amassed more troops and tanks on Lebanon's border in recent days as it continues to pound Beirut and other areas of the country, and killed over 100 people on Saturday and Sunday. U.S. officials told ABC News on Saturday that they believe Israel is preparing for a limited ground incursion into southern Lebanon, even after it decimated Hezbollah's leadership. On Sunday, U.S. officials told ABC that small-scale raids to take out Hezbollah positions right across the border may have already started. The officials said they expect any ground incursion to be limited, but said Israeli troops may still face stiff resistance. The ABC report said Israel isn't listening to U.S. calls for de-escalation and diplomacy, which aren't genuine since the Biden administration continues to lavish Israel with military aid and shows strong public support for the killing of Lebanon Secretary General Nasrallah. Lebanon's health ministry said Sunday that an estimated 105 people were killed in another day after the bombing, which targeted Beirut and other areas of Lebanon and near the southern city of Sidon. According to Al Jazeera, the strikes hit two residential buildings and killed 32 people, with 33 people being killed across Lebanon on Monday. So the Lebanese Government Emergency Committee released figures on Sunday of the total casualties in Lebanon inflicted by Israel over the past year. So since October 8th, 2023, 1,640 people, including 104 children and 198 women, have been killed, and 8,408 have been wounded. At least 816 have been killed since September 23rd, when Israel began its dramatic escalation of the airstrikes. And I will check to make sure that 700 number is right. I read that as an estimate of the Nasrallah killing, but obviously the number should be quite a bit higher than 1,600 if that is correct. So I'll do some research and let you know for the next show exactly what I think about that. I thought the Israelis said they thought the total was 350, which is still fairly substantial number of civilians killed. All right, so next up here is an article I wrote for antiwar.com on September 27th. Netanyahu says Israel is fighting a war on 7 fronts. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu slammed the United Nations during his remarks at the 79th General Assembly Summit on Friday. He called the body a swamp of anti-Semitism while saying Israel needed to defend itself on 7 fronts. The Israeli leader's speech was contentious. Before Netanyahu took to the podium, the Pakistani Prime Minister Sharif blasted Israel for waging a genocide in Gaza and creating a war in Lebanon. As Netanyahu began his address, a large portion of the UN General Assembly body walked out. During his remarks, Netanyahu referred to the General Assembly as a swamp of anti-Semitic bile. He went on to slam the International Criminal Court for considering charging him with war crimes, adding the true war criminals were Iran and its allied nations. During his address, Netanyahu presented 2 maps, one titled The Blessing and the other titled The Curse. The Israeli leader said Tel Aviv is still seeking a normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia. He claimed that if Riyadh established official ties with Israel, the world will receive a blessing and Iran represent a curse to the region. The Israeli leader explained the blessing was an establishment of a land bridge from India to Israel. The blessing requires Saudi Arabia to enter the Abraham Accords and normalize ties with Israel. Netanyahu stated that would have happened, but the October 7th Hamas attack prevented the deal. In a map titled The Curse, 5 countries were represented in black: Iran, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Lebanon. The Israeli leader claimed that Tehran was working to eliminate Tel Aviv using its allies in the region. Netanyahu presented the conflict as a battle between forces of civilization against barbarism, adding that Israel was fighting a war on several different fronts. When discussing Gaza, Netanyahu added that Hamas must go. He added that any end to the war that would see Hamas remain in power in Gaza is equivalent to allowing the Nazis to rebuild Germany after World War II. As with Hamas, Netanyahu also said that Israel would continue to wage war against Hezbollah until all of its objectives were met. Over the past week, Tel Aviv has significantly ramped up its military operations in southern Lebanon. All right, next up here. So in response to everything that happened over the past weekend, U.S. to bolster forces in Middle East and issues warnings to Iran. So the Pentagon on Sunday announced steps to bolster its forces in the Middle East amid Israel's nonstop bombardment of Lebanon. The Pentagon spokesperson, Major General Pat Ryder, said the U.S. will reinforce its air support capabilities in the coming days, and said Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin increased the readiness of additional U.S. forces to deploy, elevating our preparedness to respond to various contingencies. Ryder said Austin also ordered the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln and its strike group to stay at the weekend. Additionally, the USS Wasp Amphibious Ready Group Marine Expeditionary Unit will also continue to operate in the Eastern Mediterranean. Ryder also issued a warning to Iran in a statement saying, Secretary Austin stressed that the United States is determined to prevent Iran-bad parties and proxies from exploiting the situation and expanding the conflict. Secretary Austin made it clear that Iran, its partners, or its proxies use this moment to target American personnel or interests in the region. The United States will take every necessary measure to defend our people. The U.S. has been vowing to defend Israel from any potential Iranian attack, and the Pentagon said last week that one purpose of maintaining an increased force posture in the region. The support that you are seeing when it comes to the U.S. forces in the region is our own force protection, and should we need to come to the defense of Israel, we saw that from a large-scale attack in Iran, said Pentagon spokeswoman Sabrina Singh. Singh was referencing when the U.S. directly intervened to defend Israel from Iranian missiles and drones back in April, an unprovoked attack by the Israeli bombing of Iran's consulate in Damascus, Syria. Iran is vowing to respond to the killing of a senior IRGC commander who was killed alongside Hezbollah Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah. I also think Iran may end up increasing its posture in the region as a reaction to what is happening here. Iran has long maintained that Hezbollah is capable of defending itself, but over this past week, it seems that that was proven false. That's something that Trita Parsi had wrote on Twitter. I thought was a really important observation. All right. Wrapping up the show today, one more article from our friend Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com. Israel bombs Yemen's Hodeidah port, killing at least 4. The Israeli military conducted airstrikes against Yemen's Red Sea port of Hodeidah on Sunday, killing at least 4 people and wounding 29. Yemen's health ministry said the death toll is preliminary and could rise. According to Al Mayadeen, the strikes hit a port facility, a power generation plant, and the Hodeidah airport. The Israeli military said it carried out their strikes in response to Houthis firing missiles towards Israel. On Friday, the Houthis claimed they launched strikes on Israeli cities and several U.S. warships. Dozens of Israeli warplanes were involved in the strikes on Hodeidah, which the Israeli military said targeted ports and oil facilities and sensitive Houthi military sites. Also sounds like it targeted a lot of civilian infrastructure, particularly the power generation facilities. U.S. and Israeli officials told Axios that Israel notified U.S. Central Command ahead of the strikes, meaning Israel coordinated with the U.S. on the attack. Since January, the U.S. has been bombing Yemen as a part of a new campaign that has failed to stop the Houthi attacks on shipping. Israel bombed Yemen for the first time back in July in response to a Houthi drone attack on Tel Aviv that killed one civilian. The Israeli Air Force also targeted Hodeidah in July, hitting oil infrastructure and killing 6 civilians. The U.S. backed Saudi UAE war against the Houthis from 2015 till 2022 involved heavy airstrikes in the blockade, and the Houthis only became a more formidable fighting force during that time. The world war killed at least 377,000 people, with more than half dying due to starvation and disease caused by the siege and the destruction of infrastructure. A ceasefire between the Houthis and Saudis has held relatively well since April 2022, but new U.S. sanctions are now blocking the implementation of a lasting peace deal. And of course, all these tensions in the Middle East could probably reignite that conflict and a lot of others very quickly. All right, everybody, that's where I'm going to wrap up the show today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Got a full week of shows planned this week.